Welcome, everyone. I'm Doug Smith with Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative and would like to welcome you to our presentation, or Ms. Kim Howard's presentation of Fundamentals of Reinforcement with the Autism Hour.
Today's topic is reinforcement. We're going to spend some time talking about reinforcement and thinking through all the pieces, or at least some of them. Reinforcement is one of those topics that we could spend hours on if you really super wanted to deep dive, but we're gonna go as deep as we can in the next hour, and kind of think it through for our students. Because when we're thinking about how do we support behavior and how do we support um, behavioral needs of any student, then one of the things that we can do is talk about reinforcement for them. We all need reinforcement. So what is reinforcement? So reinforcement is an event, an activity, or other circumstance occurring after a learner engages in a desired behavior that leads to an increased occurrence of the behavior in the future. So reinforcement basically makes it more likely that whatever you were doing, the behavior is more likely to occur again. And it establishes the relationship between the learner's behavior and the use of a skill or the consequence of that behavior or skill, right? So that is our basic definition of reinforcement. And we'll go a little bit more into that as we go throughout. Why does it matter, right? Well, it motivates students and it also motivates all humans. We all need reinforcement. I love my job, right? And I really do love my job. But if I stop getting paid, eventually I would have to find a new job, right? Because I would need money, just for the fact of life, right? Reinforcement motivates students. It helps build replacement skills. It promotes independence. And winner, winner, it reduces challenging behavior. And reinforcement is one of the most widely researched pieces of evidence-based practices. So it is an evidence-based practice. So there is such a thing as positive reinforcement, and that means that you're adding something pleasant to the behavior that increases the behavior, such as you're giving a reward, or a preferred item. So say a student, you're giving them TV time after report, or they get a sticker. They sit in their seat like you asked them to, so they get a sticker or a token. Or there is negative reinforcement, and you're removing something unpleasant and the behavior increases. So you do it correct this time, so you don't have to do the rest. So one of the things that I always think about is the seatbelt alarm is negative reinforcement. The seatbelt alarm goes off, ding, 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 ding. You've got in your car, you're driving down the street, and the seatbelt alarm is going off. And so that highly encourages me to buckle my seatbelt. And so we buckle our seatbelt. Okay, there is such a thing as primary reinforcement versus secondary reinforcement. Primary reinforcement are things that we need for survival, basically. Primary reinforcers are food, drink, and sensory items. And sensory items could be argued that we don't necessarily need them for survival, but I will say for our students with autism and sensory needs, they definitely need those for survival versus secondary reinforcers, which have to be learned. We have to learn those. And they acquire value by being paired with your primary reinforcers. So these are your token economy, praise, stickers, and money are all considered secondary reinforcement. And both are good and fine. There are different kinds of reinforcement. Okay, so how do you build secondary reinforcers? Because primary reinforcers, we don't want to have to give food out to kids all the time. I'm going to flip back one. We don't want to hand out food and drink to kids all the time. And when we think about our most challenging students, our students with extensive support needs, a lot of times when we are working with them, and we're looking at what do they want, what kinds of things motivate them, or what are their reinforcement, they are those primary reinforcers. They're motivated by food and drink and maybe sensory items. They don't probably have a lot of secondary reinforcers yet. And so how do we teach those? Well, we kind of pair those primary reinforcers with secondary reinforcers, right? So here is kind of a chart of how you might do that, right? So you could social, you give out high fives, you have a class party, a hand clapping activity, a tangible example of stickers, and the edible with sweets. So you're pairing that edible, which is the primary reinforcer, with a sticker. You did some hand clapping. You paired it with a class party, and there was the social of the high five. So you're kind of pairing those all together. You're not just doing one. And later on, we'll talk about being specific for what we are reinforcing for. Um, and if gradually, hopefully you can fade out that primary reinforcer. You're not constantly having to give them the gummy bear. You could switch over to the bubbles, or switch over to something else that they like as well. And it takes time to kind of build and shape those. And that's okay. That's just where kids are at, and that's where you have to start at. So individualization is key. What works for one student may not work for another. We have to identify individual preferences, especially for our students that are extensive support needs or have extreme or intensive behaviors. Use a reinforcer assessment to determine what motivates each student, right? And you need to be aware of sensory sensitivities or aversions, especially if you're dealing with primary reinforcers, which are mainly food items. Some kids won't eat squishy items. They're not going to eat the squishy item. You have to go with hard crunchy, or maybe they avoid hard crunchy and you have to go to the squishy. You need to know those things. So figuring those out in the beginning kind of just takes time. And individualization is key. And we'll talk about how do we do that. So I'm going to stop share on this and we're going to look at preference assessments. And it's a video. You should hopefully see it. It should say evidence-based practices for young children. This screen is useful because it will let you see a video with a child. This is usable for any age. The video example is just with young children. This is from Vanderbilt. They have done a really nice job. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. If you look on the right side of the screen in the little tan box, it says other resources. It has all of your data collection sheets that you would need. And I'm going to play the preference assessment with toys. So the way that this is a preference assessment. And what a preference assessment is it's a way for you to decide what is the child going to work for right now. So I'm about to work with this child and I need to know what they want to work for. This is a formal preference assessment. I'm not doing this every day. I'm not doing this all of the time. Does that make sense? I'm doing this occasionally. I'm doing this if I'm struggling with a student to get them to work. I'm doing this probably a couple of times a week for my very difficult students that are extensive support needs. I did this especially for like alternate assessment. I did this during those specific times, and I did it at least weekly for my students that were extensive support needs. So I'm going to hit play and we're going to watch an example of it and then I will kind of talk you through it because I think it makes more sense for you to see it if you've never seen it before. Ready, Bob? The phone. Good choice. Beep, 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 beep. Ring, 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 ring. Hello? Hi, Tyler. Tyler. My turn in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Put in. Try again. Put in. Good job. Good one. We have dinosaur, maracas, sloth, and clothes. Which one? You picked dinosaur. Cool. You want him a bite? We can make him run. We can make him run or jump. Choose one. They're maraca, box, and bell. Choose one. You picked the ball. Good choice. Okay, I'm gonna pause there and I'm gonna hit escape and try to go out. So she is walking you through, and I'm gonna scroll down so you can kind of see this is uh her data collection sheet is example would be this. Um, she kind of has the X's, and this is the food one, the example of the food one, which we didn't watch. I wanted you to see the toy. So she's marking the placement of where the item is at. And as you can tell, this is called multiple stimulus without replacement, right? So they're not putting the item back. I don't do that formal of a preference assessment every single time. I did it for my very difficult kids on a very regular basis. I did it with all of my kids on a weekly basis to kind of see what would they work for when I was working with kids with extensive support needs. For my students who were verbal, what could I do? I would just say, what do you want to work for? I could ask that question and they could respond, right? But for my kids that don't have that capacity or didn't have that ability yet, this is one option. It's called a preference assessment. What would be an informal way of doing this is I could just put some things out and let them pick and not go through the whole thing. The benefit of going through the ranking system is that you have a rank order and you know that she liked the dinosaur second best. She liked the phone the most. She liked the ball the third, right? So if I'm doing activities and I need the high preference reinforcer, then now I know I'm going to ask her to do something really hard for her. Then I know that I should probably pull out that phone because that phone was her highest ranked reinforcer, right? And then if I'm going to do something that she didn't need a lot of reinforcement for, then I could go for one of those items that she picked last because they were her least favorite. So that's the benefit of that. So all of that website is free, and those data sheets are totally free. So you have that as well. So that is called a preference assessment, and I just wanted you to watch it because and see what they are. There are some benefits to doing them. They do take a few minutes of time, and you're not doing them with every kid all the time. You're doing them with your most intensive needs. And that version of a preference assessment I'm doing with my students that they don't have the ability to say, if I said, hey, what do you want to work for? They can't tell me. So I need to go to some other way of figuring out what they'll work for. So that's who I'm using that for. So especially when we're thinking about motivating and we're thinking about supporting intensive behaviors. I think preference assessments can be a kind of a key piece of that we sometimes miss out for our students. Okay, so let's talk about schedules of reinforcement because not only knowing what kids will work for is important, but timing out how often they get that reinforcer is also a critical piece. So, continuous reinforcement is every time they give a correct response, they get a reinforcement. And this is where a lot of our kids start, right? As soon as they give you that response, you're asking Johnny to sit in the chair. As soon as Johnny sits in the chair, you give them the tiny piece of the Skittle or you give them the token. That is called continuous reinforcement. And that's really good for teaching new skills or for students that need a very high rate of reinforcement. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few other versions of what reinforcement might look like. Some other options that I want you to know about. So fixed ratio. What is fixed ratio reinforcement? So fixed ratio, I can't say that. Fixed ratio reinforcement is reinforcement after a set number of responses. So every time they get three correct answers, then they get a sticker. It's useful during skill building and acquisition. So you're going to see these with a lot of token charts. And the example there is the loyalty card, right? Buy 9 cups of coffee, get one free, kind of a deal. So that's called fixed ratio. So they get three answers correct, and then they get a sticker. Um, Another example is called variable ratio. Okay, like fixed ratio reinforcement, variable ratio reinforcement provides rewards after a certain number of behaviors have been performed. But what is different between variable ratio reinforcement is the unpredictability of when they're going to get the reward. So they don't know when the reward is coming. The reward behaviors can vary each time before the reinforcement is presented. The unpredictability often leads to a higher response rates because the students are motivated by the uncertainty of when they'll receive the next reward. So this is true for slot machines, and that's why the slot machine is on there. I'm not a gambler person, but if you've ever been gambling, I'm told that a slot machine is a pretty good example of that, because a player might need to just play at 1, 2, 12, or 1,000 pulls of the lever before you hit the jackpot, and you don't know when you're going to win. So that's what keeps people pulling that level, that lever, and keeps you coming back and being engaged because, the next time might be the time that you win. So for some students, you can move on to that variable ratio of reinforcement, and they're going to do really well with that. So you're giving them reinforcement on an unpredictable schedule. And so it creates a higher rate of them responding the way you want them to because it's like a slot machine. They don't know when good things are coming, but they know it's coming, and you want it to come soon enough that they don't lose interest. Okay. Fixed interval reinforcement is reinforcement after a set of time. So it's kind of like paychecks are often considered the most common form of fixed interval reinforcement. Another example of this might be at giving a child an allowance. So if you have a child at home, they get an allowance by cleaning their room by Saturday. So at home, they're kind of cleaning their room. So this could be that you're giving kids a break every 10 minutes of on-task behavior. So you're asking them to do something for 10 minutes. I have done this with students to where I have said, hey, if you will work for 5 or 10 minutes, then you can have a break. So you're not asking them to perform. They don't have to, they don't have to do 5 math problems, but you're asking them to perform, to work for a certain amount of time. Specifically, it's time versus correct responses. And then this is variable interval. And so variable interval reinforcement differs just slightly from fixed interval reinforcement in that it's random amounts of time have passed before a behavior is considered. And so you're giving praise or you're giving reinforcement at varying intervals of time. And it's unpredictable. They don't know when they're going to be done. And so you're not telling them, but they know that they're going to be done soon. And examples of this in real life are like health inspectors at restaurants, pop quizzes that happen in some classrooms, um, kind of make the timing unvariable or make the timing variable and unpredictable. So those are examples of what that might look like in the real world, kind of real world problems out there. So tips for using successful reinforcement. And reinforcers can be hard for our students with autism because we don't always know what they want. How do we determine what our kids want? and figure out what will reinforce them can be very difficult. So using that preference assessment to determine motivators and interest. Be immediate and specific. If when you're giving kids, if you're you should be using verbal praise. So anytime I'm giving a child any kind of reinforcement, be it a sticker, a token, um, verbal praise, I'm always using verbal praise with it, right? So that sticker, that token, that Skittle, I'm saying, I loved how you sat in your chair. That was great job. Or I loved how you got your math work done. So I'm pairing that those two together, right? Be immediate and specific. You want kids to know what they're being reinforced for. And you want to vary reinforcers if you can, if you have students that have a variety of reinforcers, because kids will reach satiation, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then you want to be able to fade out carefully to where you don't have to give them so much all the time because, kids will become done with it. So, how do we avoid common mistakes for reinforcer? Using weak reinforcers or things that kids don't want. We're asking kids to do work and they don't care. The reward that you're offering is not motivating. I was in a classroom in the last few weeks and one they were asking a student to work and they were never going to do the work for the reinforcer that was being offered. They did not care about that particular reinforcer. So figuring out what will the child work for. Reinforcing too late, so waiting too long. You've asked a child to work or a student to work, and they are you're doing a token system or you're doing some sort of you're giving them tokens or stickers or points, and maybe you're asking them to wait until Friday to get their reinforcement, but they can't even make it until lunchtime or they may need it much sooner. So you have to be realistic about what's a real amount of time that that student can wait. Um, Kids may need reinforcing much more often than is comfortable or we would like to do. Don't accidentally reinforce the problem behavior. That is much more easily done than we think. Um, and not fading out the reinforcement over time and being inconsistent. Sometimes we don't give the reward, or sometimes we don't give the sticker. We're not consistent with it, and so we didn't keep the deal. And so if we don't keep the deal, kids will realize that we're just kind of lying, or we're not sticking with what we said we would do, and so they're not going to stick with it either. So what is satiation? So it's when we get full. It's where we're tired of it. I love chocolate. I really do actually love chocolate very much. And I would eat chocolate every day of the week. But there's a point to where I have eaten so much chocolate that I don't want chocolate anymore, right? And the same things will happen to your student. They've gotten their favorite reinforcer over and over. And so now they're tired of it. So it's important if you can to keep a list. I tell people if you have really complicated or complex students, keep a list of reinforcers for them so that when you're having a hard day or you're having a great day and maybe you just need a different reinforcer, you can go to that list and pull out that list of reinforcers and try to, pick some different ones or do that preference assessment using some different reinforcers to see what else they might be willing to work for so that our kids will hopefully be willing to and able to utilize some of those. So know those things. And edible reinforcers, we know a lot of our kids start out and that's a primary reinforcer, right? I could chop a Skittle into two, three, four pieces. Not all kids will work for that small of a piece. I always told my husband, you work in special education. If it's Saturday and you're on your couch and you have a pill cutter and you are cutting M&Ms and Skittles into fourths because you have a kid who is working on communication or working for those kind of reinforcers. And so you have to do it at home on the weekend. So thinking about that, how can you make them small enough that you can give them enough that they will work for that, but not so much. You don't want to give them the a whole bag of Skittles, because then they're done. You know, they've done one thing for you and they're done for the day. So thinking through that piece of it, especially if it's an edible reinforcer. Okay, pairing. And I stole this from Tansen. You can find the entire thing. So it is like 78 pages, and there are several other items related to reinforcement that I encourage you to go back and look at. Each one looks something similar to this. It has a why is it important? When can it be used? It has a how to implement. And then it has a little QR code that will actually you can scan and watch a short video, which I abjectly love. So pairing is pairing yourself with reinforcement. So pairing is when two items or activities are consistently experienced together. So the perceived value will influence the perceived value of another. So we need to pair ourself with reinforcement and pair the learning environment as a reinforcer. So we want to make sure that kids realize that when they come to our classroom and when they see us, that they know that good things are going to happen with us. So at the beginning of the school year, especially, or if they're new to you, we've been we've been on a break. You can definitely. So if you pair yourself with reinforcement, that means that you're the giver of good things. So the child loves to play with spinning toys, loves to play with sensory toys. That means that you're getting down on the floor with them and you're playing with those items. It means that maybe they don't love for you to play with those items, but you're being in proximity while they're playing with those items so that they can appreciate you and that item in the same location. Does that make sense? It includes, I failed at this. That's why I'm making sure that I tell you all this. I was an epic failure at this. In my classroom, I had a lot of kids and I had some really phenomenal classroom assistants. And I pushed very hard for the academic pieces and I pushed really hard for the academic and the communication pieces. And so I did those pieces and I sent my kids off with the assistants for those fun times and those fun reinforcers. And so my kids, when they would see me, knew that I meant the end of fun because I was going to make them do the academic piece. I was the opposite of fun. We were going to do the academic stuff and we were going to work on communication and things that they did not see as fun. They really needed it, but it was not fun. So make sure that you are also the giver of good things. Be a chocolate chip cookie, is what Sasha Long says. Make sure that kids see you as something positive and something good. Blow bubbles with them, play with them, do things like that, so that they know that you are also reinforcing and that your classroom can be a reinforcing place as well. Okay, so we're not going to do this with a partner, but we are going to talk through some faulty scenarios. So, and you guys can put these in the chat or you are welcome to unmute and talk with me. So, faulty reinforcement scenarios. The adult gives a piece of candy to a student who is yelling so they will quiet down. The way that these work are we're trying to identify what's the reinforcer. We're trying to determine what is the likely outcome if this continues, and we're trying to identify how could we fix it? Like, so what can we do to fix this problem? We're trying to identify what's the reinforcer here and what will happen if we continue to do this. And these are all things that I have seen. Okay, so an adult gives a piece of candy to the student who is yelling so they will quiet down. What do you think will happen? So what's the reinforcer? And if you don't want to unmute, that's okay. You can just type it into the chat and I can read it out loud. So first off, what's the reinforcer here? What is our reinforcer? And then do you think the student will keep yelling or stop yelling? And how could we fix this scenario to make it a little bit better? And I'm going to read your responses. And you're also welcome to unmute. And access was updated. Okay, so the reinforcer is candy. Yes, very much. The reinforcer is candy. Definitely. And so the kid will expect candy. Yeah, it's going to make the kid's going to keep on yelling. Absolutely. So this is something that I saw in real life. There was a situation where a child was yelling. So the way that we fixed this was they had gone to a assembly, right? Um, yeah, the kid will definitely keep yelling. They had gone to an assembly and they were trying to get the child to quieten down, and the child had started yelling. And so they gave the candy to the child after they had already started yelling. And so I think that it would have been totally fine if they had given the child candy before they started yelling, right? Because the goal was to give them something to put in their mouth so that they would be quiet and participate in the assembly. So we didn't want them to connect candy with yelling. Does that make sense? So to me, if they had given them the candy as soon as they had gone into the assembly, along with like a visual support reminder, like a visual support that says, "Hey, like quiet," we're in like a little like visual reminder that says, "Shh, quiet." We're in an assembly. We can't yell. And then they gave them candy or something in their mouth they gave them a sucker to help them quiet down before they started yelling. And so the candy then is like an antecedent intervention. I have no problem giving a kid a sucker as an antecedent before they start yelling. Does that make sense? So that was my fix. The candy wasn't wrong. It was the timing of how they gave it. Remember earlier we talked about the timing of stuff. And so this one, it was just faulty timing. We didn't want them to connect, hey, if I yell, I get candy. We did want them to connect. I sat down, so they gave the candy when they sat down at the assembly and they had quiet hands. Immediately, they gave them the candy preemptively. And so as soon as they sat and were quiet, it gave them the candy sucker, which helped them be able to sit and participate in the assembly, which was an IEP goal. So, okay. Thank you guys. We're going to do another. Okay. So a student is on a token economy system, but misbehaves, and they lose all of their tokens that they have already earned. So what's the reinforcer? And what do you think will happen in this circumstance? And how can we fix it? And I have seen this in real life too. So they're on a token economy system and they do something, and so they lose all the tokens that they've already earned. So what's our reinforcer here? What are they getting? What are they earning? And you don't really know. It's in this case, you can just, yeah. Yeah, the token, right? The token is our reinforcer. And here's my pet peeve. My pet peeve is if you earned a token or you earned something like a sticker or you earned it, you cannot take it all away. You can't take it all away, everything that they earned, no matter how bad they've been. And I know that's controversial, but we will lose them. That system will not work if you take everything away when they misbehave. The opposite is that they don't earn the next token. Like it's totally okay to say whatever you did, you have misbehaved, so you cannot earn your next token. That's totally fine. Like you can say you don't earn the next token. You can totally say that. But if you take away everything that they earned, that's too discouraging. I totally agree. It's too discouraging. It would be like you did something, you made some error at work, and we all know that we all goof up at work. I goof up at work my own self all the time. And then somebody came in and said, "Miss Howard, you messed up at work, and so we're taking your entire paycheck. Sorry, but there's no paycheck for you." So, same thing. Don't take away all the tokens. You can say you don't earn the next token. Totally fine. But you cannot say, I'm taking all of your tokens that you've earned for the day. Okay. Next scenario. It's 8:30 a.m. on Monday. A student has lost all of the tokens for the entire day or week with no opportunity to earn them back. And this is true life. I was there. They've lost all of their tokens. It's 8:30 and I believe it was for the week. They're not going to give them back. I can't remember exactly what happened, but the teacher was ticked and they had taken away every token. And this one, I'm not going to make you guys guess because we've already talked a little bit about it, but um, it's too similar to the other one. But for real, like at this point, you're kind of shooting your own self in the foot because if a child has lost all opportunities for reinforcement for the day or for the week, they have nothing to lose. Like they don't have anything to lose. And it's no holds bar. They can be as bad as they want at that point. And they don't have anything left to lose. So you are like you're setting your own self up for failure if you do that. And I know none of you guys are doing that. And the teacher that was doing this was not a bad person or a bad teacher at all. Just very frustrated. And it was a difficult circumstance and was very frustrated. So it was definitely a Blue Monday. So you have to kind of think through those moments that if we take away all of a student's opportunity to earn reinforcement, then they do not have anything left to lose. And so they have no motivation to behave or to engage in whatever we're asking them to do. They don't have anything left to lose at that point. And so there's no desire left or no need for them to behave. So we have to kind of think through those things and know that if we do things like that, we set our own self up for failure and the student too. And I know kids sometimes do things that are incredibly difficult, but um, you have to really, really think through those moments. I tell adults if you're reaching a moment to where you're like, you're losing all of your tokens, take a deep breath and put yourself in timeout. I tell adults that it's okay to say, I don't know what your punishment is, or I don't know, I can't respond to you right now. As the adult, you don't have to tell the child this, but you can say, I need you to go back to your seat. I'm going to get back with you in a few minutes because you need a minute to cool off. And I think that's what happened in this circumstance. The teacher lost their cool, and they had every right to lose their cool. Um, but they lost their cool, and then they put this punishment on the student. They put this punishment on the student without thinking through the consequences for their own self. And then we all live to regret it because they told the student this was what was going to happen. And so it put them in a terrible position of what do we do? It put all of us in a terrible position. So if you're in that spot, take a deep breath as the adult and have somebody tag team out to another adult for a few minutes and don't make the decision about what happens in that moment. It's okay to say, I need a minute and have that child hopefully go back to their seat or another adult to step in before you decide what should happen. When you can decide, hopefully, when cooler heads prevail for everyone, what's a more realistic punishment or a more realistic set of circumstances that still gives you an opportunity for everyone to survive the week. So, something to think about, right? Okay, so this one I definitely see. Um, a student earns a break only after completing all work, but they often shut down before finishing, and they rarely achieve the break. So what is the reinforcer here? So definitely put this in the chat for me. What's our reinforcer here? And this is the last one that we'll do. I think this is the last one in the thing. Yeah. So our reinforcer is, it's our break, right? So it is definitely our break. And I see this pretty frequently. Um, it is our break. And I love giving a student a break. I have no problem with the break being a reinforcement. But in this circumstance, what's happening is they're waiting too long to give reinforcement. If you're in the circumstance to where they are rarely achieving the break. I tell people that students should be achieving reinforcement with about 90%, 90, like 85, 90, 95% accuracy. You got to think about reinforcement achievement with it should be like thinking about it with literacy reading rates achievement. It needs to be very high. They need to be achieving it often or something in your system is broken. If they can't achieve it on a very regular basis, then something in your reinforcement system is broken. You're waiting too long, what you're asking them to do is too hard, or what your reinforcer isn't the right one. It's not motivating enough, or they're not really reinforced by it. Something inside of it is broken. And in this case, with this gentleman, they were waiting too long to reinforce him. He needed a break. He needed a break sooner. And it was just too much to get that break. So, common thing, not anybody's fault, just needed to make some simple adjustments. And sometimes we just have to make some simple tweaks to make it work a little bit better.
Just again, Miss Kim, thank you so much for all uh, your work and your expertise that you bring to us throughout our region, and really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.